Hey everybody! Welcome to Talky Taffy.
Hello.
Hi, it's Talky Taffy, where we take a bite out of some topic and we stretch it out, make it enjoyable and fun for everybody. I'm your host today. My name is Doug. I am joined by my co-host Emily.
That's me. Hi.
Hi, Emily. And yeah, so we're talking about money. We're talking about money. The stuff you use
funny.
to exchange for goods and services.
For goods and services.
Correct. Precisely. And Emily, the question I want to start with you is, how much do you tip at restaurants?
15 is my minimum. I try to do 20.
Okay.
Yes. That is about 15%.
Okay.
Yeah, that's about how much I tip.
I think that's usually about what I do as well. It'll usually, like, 15 is kind of my floor. And then, like, if you do pretty good, I'll do 20. If you do really good, I'll do, like, 25, something like that.
Yeah, my bare minimum is 15. I don't, like, even if it's really awful, service or whatever, I still tip 15.
Have you ever tipped 0?
When I didn't know what tipping was.
Oh, okay.
But no, I always tip. At least when I go to restaurants. Yeah, I was going through your script and I was like, oh, I didn't know you could tip there. So we'll talk about that, I'm sure.
Yeah, so an interesting... Yeah, so David raises a good point too. There's a lot of like gray area on where do you tip, where do you not. So he raised tipping about takeout. So like at no point are they actually providing you any service. They're just handing you the food basically. So would you tip in that situation?
I don't usually think to tip for takeout unless I'm like paying online and they provide a space where they're like, how much would you like to tip? In which case, I guess it's 50-50. Sometimes I will, sometimes I won't. But I don't usually think to even consider tipping when I'm doing takeout.
What about delivery?
I'll tip for delivery, but I don't usually do delivery.
Do you tip more or less for delivery?
I tip about the same, 15%.
Okay. I think I have a tendency to actually tip a little bit more for delivery, and maybe it's just because I've done delivery a lot more since COVID. Like prior to COVID, I almost never did delivery. So I guess maybe I'm just kind of rusty on my tipping habits pre-COVID, but like especially in the era of COVID, I have a lot of respect for delivery drivers. So yeah, I've been tipping pretty heavily there. I also don't like the business model of like DoorDash and Uber Eats and that kind of thing. And so anytime I am ordering delivery, I order it directly from the restaurant, even if they then subcontract to like DoorDash or whatever. To me, that's, I don't know, it just seems cleaner because it feels like there's a little bit more direct responsibility there. But we'll get into the whole conversation about like DoorDash and how they pay their drivers and everything.
Yeah. I can't remember the last time I ordered delivery. Like I usually go out and do takeout, especially these days. So
yeah, and then Lissa raises another good point about like tipping at bars. So like general rules, if you get a beer, you tip $1 or something like that. And then the other interesting one that I wanted to bring up is I read about this, it must have been 2 or 3 years ago, how there was an airline that wanted, or that like, they had their iPads that they did their ordering on. And then you'd have to like, go sign when you pay for your drink or whatever. And then it would give you the option to tip on there. So would you tip a flight attendant for doing beverage service?
I suppose if I were ordering alcohol, but I never order alcohol on planes. Like I actually never order food on airplanes. But if I were if it were alcohol, I think I would tip. At least $1, depending on how expensive the drink is.
It's such a weird thing to me because
Yeah.
I wouldn't. Like I feel like I just wouldn't tip a flight attendant because to me it's just part of their job. To me it's no harder for them to pour me a glass of beer or a mixed drink than it is to like make an orange juice or a Sprite.
Yeah.
You know, and so like to me there's no extra work being done there, which is a point I'll get to later as well. But yeah, it's really weird, and I think that's where this conversation ultimately leads. Is it someone's job, like their basic expectations, versus is it something that they're doing above and beyond? And tipping is really supposed to reward the latter, someone doing exceptional service, and you give them kind of that extra reward, and that encourages further instances of that exceptional service. Alyssa also raises a good point. Flight attendants probably make more than like restaurant workers. Yeah. But that's not the case in the rest of the world. That's just North America that does that. Because in the rest of the world, they do pay their wait staff fairly, and you don't need to worry about it.
In fact, they give you weird looks if you try to tip. Because I remember going to Europe and they're like, don't do that.
Yeah, it can be kind of like an arrogant or like a pity thing that you're trying to tip someone.
Yeah.
So let's dive into it. A lot of this stuff is touching on stuff I've got written down. But yeah, so to begin with, TIP actually is an acronym. So it comes from the phrase to ensure promptness. So it was used for like couriers back in the 19th century, back in the 1800s. Basically, people who were delivering a package that needed to arrive urgently would just throw a little extra money that way, say, hey, just make sure it gets there quick, you know, like little extra priority kind of thing. And so to ensure promptness, tip. That's how we got that. Now, kind of the way that tips are supposed to work is that, quote, tips are a form of payment where it is the customer who monitors performance as a quality control function. And so what's supposed to happen is that the customer decides how the employee should be paid based on how good the service is, which is to say if the employee is doing a very good job, they get paid a little bit better. And if not, then they get paid a little bit worse. And it's kind of a self-feeding cycle that rewards good service. We'll get into why that's not always the case a little bit later. But first I want to talk about where this has worked pretty well. One place where we see tipping as an idea work pretty effectively is on internet content creators. So specifically with Twitch, there's like the whole concept of bits and subscriptions built into the website itself, where you can directly reward these people with financial incentives. Offline, there are also these third-party ways that you can, you know, set up your whatever thing. It's your Patreon or whatever it is, and people can just support you through another platform for work you do, you know, separate from there. And so it's kind of this direct consumer to creator connection there that's supposed to kind of simplify things and directly incent that work. Yeah, so is that good or bad? I mean, part of the thing with Twitch is that Twitch takes their cut out of that money, and it's pretty significant. I mean, we're talking as low as 28%, but as high as 50% of the money that's donated on Twitch goes to the pocket of Amazon, their parent company. And so, yeah, is that really a good incentive? Is it working the way that the end user expects it to? Maybe not. And I think that's where these third-party platforms are catching a little more steam. But we did touch on food service a little bit, and that's where we see that tipping is such a normal part of North American society. And one thing that's interesting here is just how fake it all is to me. And well, superficial is probably a better word for it. But basically, what it comes down to is that, like, one study showed that leaving a piece of candy with a check or drawing a smiley face on the check significantly affects the amount that a customer will tip. And it's all about this, facade of niceness that the server generates. Even if they're not genuinely interested in a person, they still put on this show and convince them that they're interested and care, or at least this is the argument, and then get tips that way. What I found really interesting was how much of a science there is. There's one expert that actually wrote down a list of 23 actions a server can take to maximize their tips. It's like, hey, these are just the 23 things you can do, just like quick life hacks. And it's just so weird how transactional and like I said, just how superficial that is.
Yeah.
And then the other good point that I saw too is like the tip is related to the cost of the good or the service, not to the amount of work put into it. So in other words, one person orders a $60 bottle of wine with dinner. 10% tip on that would be $6. Another person orders a $1,000 bottle of wine, and a 10% tip on that is $100. But it takes just as much work for the server to pour the $1,000 bottle of wine as it does the $60 bottle of wine. So why would
the
you?
Added stress of holding a $1,000 bottle of wine, though.
Now I will say, yes, I would be very stressed out by that for sure. And the other way, like the other thing that came to mind with this specific example is the like the champagne glass where they do the scimitar thing. You know what I'm talking about? So like you run a scimitar along the length of the bottle, it catches the neck and it pops off. Like
yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. And I would tip better for that.
Wine sword.
Yeah. That's just like, that's a cool party trick or whatever. But yeah, and at the end of the day, like they're just pouring a bottle of wine, right? So why should it be any different based on the value of that wine? One of the things that we see is the most egregious abuse of the tipping economy is what happens with specifically like DoorDash and Instacart. In DoorDash's case, after months of outcry at their unfair practices and opaque policies, they made some changes to their pay structure. But what really happened is that it just made it more mysterious. Or I'm sorry, that was actually Instacart. So like they claimed that their new system paid more, but it was just a lot harder to understand. And so drivers didn't fully understand how to maximize their revenue out of it. And in addition to that, they rewarded certain things like 5-star reviews, but then made it harder for customers to leave reviews. Like they moved it to a different section in the app or whatever. And like really shady stuff like this. In DoorDash's case, they did up the pay for their drivers, but only basically to the minimum they needed to. So instead of $3 an hour, if you can believe it, for their base pay, they moved it up to $7 to $10 an hour, which is still far below a livable wage, right?
Yeah.
But what really sucks is that the people that get victimized most by these practices are people who are vulnerable to needing this kind of employment versus anything else that's a little bit more secure and fair. And of course that means it disproportionately victimizes minorities and those that that increased risk or who are already in a situation of, a threat to their wealth.
Financial difficulty, yeah.
Yeah, financial difficulty. And so it just kind of perpetuates this wealth gap between classes. And that's something that's very directly happening as a result of these apps. And it's not like the people behind these apps are making money either. Like, they're losing money. So it's hard to identify any real benefit out of this. And like, you as the customer, you order something through DoorDash or whatever, and you're like, why does this salad cost $14? And it's like the prices on stuff just adds up so quickly on there. At least in my experience, it's just not worth it. So I don't know. I have a lot of beef there. I could go on for ages, but yeah. And then the other thing that along those lines of minorities and the wealth gap is that tipping as a practice targets minorities. We see like immigrants left Europe to come to America because they were so fed up with tipping in Europe, which is where it started, because tipping out there was kind of a way for the aristocrats to reciprocate their money to each other. And so they were fleeing that and coming to America. And then now it's a thing in America, not back there.
Yeah.
And so that kind of flopped. And then one expert talked about this master and servant relationship between the tipper and the server, which I guess is more of a psychological thing than anything. But I can definitely see that argument, how it puts you at a different, power dynamic. Mm-hmm. So I found that interesting. That's not something I've thought about before in the context of tipping. But by far the most clear example of where you see this discrimination is just the fact that time and time again, studies have shown that African American servers get tipped less than their non-Black counterparts. Even if the service is of equal quality, it just means that, these African Americans are just being paid less because of their skin color. And that's, at least in one argument I saw being made, that's inherently a violation of the, what is that, First Amendment? No, I guess protected class. Discrimination. It's discrimination. It's illegal. And so tipping as a practice in general, by the argument from that expert, is just illegal as a practice because it's discriminatory. Which may be a little bit of a jump there, but I agree that it does perpetuate that kind of thing.
Sure, yeah.
Especially when you look at the numbers and see that it is to a statistical level of significance affecting Black people in this way, and how unfair that is and what that means for the bottom line. And it's important too to note that it's not just race. It's basically, so if you're not a well-endowed, skinny 30-year-old white girl, you're making less than the person who is. That's like the demographic that makes the most from tips. And that's science, that's statistics behind it. And it's just the way that our subconscious biases affect the way that we act. And the more that we can remove that part of the equation from the way that people make their living, the better. And so I would make the argument that alone says we shouldn't be tipping.
Yeah.
But what really sucks about tipping is that it's supposed to be a charitable thing. That's why it's called a gratuity. But in reality, it's just used by employers to abuse their employees and pay them less than they should be. And it's something that perpetuates this racial disparity and the wealth gap. So
definitely.
I'm just gonna go ahead and say it that tipping bad. along the lines of race, I also do want to talk about reparations. So this is kind of the second segment that I want to talk about. I had a third segment picked out talking about universal basic income, which is basically as we start running out of jobs that we need people to do, we need to provide some sort of, basic income for everyone so that people who can't get employment can still afford to live and stuff. Mm-hmm. It's so beyond the scope of what I have time to talk about today, but perhaps in the future that would be a good topic to discuss. But yeah, anyway, reparations. So what got me thinking about this is 2 months ago, I read an article about Evanston, Illinois, a Chicago suburb, was the first city in the United States to direct payments toward Black families for reparations, basically making up for the impact that the history of slavery has had on African American families, and specifically in this case, they were targeting housing discrimination in the 20th century. And so they took money and distributed it to 16 different families for repairs and renovations on housing, just to cover property costs, basically. One of the biggest things that we see is that these houses are left in disrepair, or these families are just so in debt with their homes that they can't ever break that loop, and they just don't have this wealth built up that white families do in these cases. And so they're just constantly at this disadvantage, and it's a self-fulfilling cycle too. And so that's kind of the idea of reparations, is to kind of just right that cycle so that it puts everyone kind of on a more level playing field. And then we can really see the pursuit of freedom actually work the way it's supposed to. Or pursuit of happiness, freedom and pursuit of happiness. But yeah, so really the biggest criticism I saw of the reparations plan is that it wasn't enough. I really honestly didn't read much about people who were against these reparations, which I expected to see more of, honestly. But of course, the communities backing these reparation measures were saying, hey, this is 16 families out of millions in the United States.
Millions, yeah.
Is that enough? In Evanston's case, they have a limited scope for what they're able to do. It's a city of 12,000. This is actually just kind of the first wave of what they plan to do. They've already set aside $10 million for these reparations, and this is only the first 400,000 of that. So they've still got plenty to use. They've only scratched the surface of what they plan to do, and this is kind of their pilot, if you will, their test phase. And so they're just trying to probably learn from this and then decide how to best proceed down the line to make it as effective as a program as they want it to be. So I'll be interested to see what happens with that. Obviously, it's an interesting case study that we'll see how it plays out. And I'm very intrigued to see what cities follow suit as well as potentially the federal government, which is one thing I do want to talk about as well. So John Oliver brought this up on his show in 2014, last week tonight, which I don't know if you watched that, but he does some very interesting investigative pieces about certain topics. And in 2014, it was one of his really early ones. He did investigate reparations and basically talk about the racial disparity in the country, and talked about how wealth in America is just a rigged lottery, basically. It was a pretty funny segment, the imagery that he posed to go with it. I highly recommend that video. It's in our references. Yeah, so to look at the scale of what this actually looks like for our country is that the kind of the leading study places that cost at as much as $4.7 trillion, which would be the equivalent of 142,000 going to each Black American in the country today. Now, this money is kind of targeted to be toward, debt, so like housing, car, student loans, that kind of thing. And then on top of that, build up a little bit of a nest egg so that these families can afford to go through certain disasters or be able to afford significant life purchases, as well as just healthcare too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some other people have called for much more dramatic figures. I think 142,000 per person is quite generous, especially when you put that in the context of a 5-person family. You're talking 700,000 and the kind of impact that could have for a family. I think it really does level the playing field as it's meant to do. And you talk about where this 4.7 trillion is coming from. Put it in the context of the amount of money we're seeing spent right now for COVID. So like we've already had, just under Biden's administration, we've had 1.9 trillion go off under the American Rescue Plan. He's also proposed a 2.3 trillion American Jobs Plan and a $1.8 trillion American Families Plan. All of this adding up to $6 trillion. And so 4.7, while it is still very significant compared to that 6 trillion, that's obviously a pretty large scale, investment. 4.7 trillion really isn't that big, especially if you think about the implications of what that means as far as actually leveling the playing field for all Americans in our country. Mm-hmm. And also, if you spread that out over time, remember, this doesn't have to happen overnight either. It's been this way for 160 years, so we've got some time to level the playing field out. So if the concern is over money, we can take our time to get there, 10 or 20 years, and it's still righting a wrong. Of course, the fear there is that subsequent administrations could reverse policy and cancel that before its full effect takes place. But I think in the meantime, there is more that we could be doing to support these families. And really what it comes down to at the end of the day is just what we prioritize. The wealth gap, which I'll mention again, is so broken in our country compared to there's a video I saw a long time ago that talked about what people think is a fair distribution of wealth, what people think the actual distribution of wealth is, and then what the actual distribution is, and how different those things are from perception.
Yeah.
It's wild. And yeah, it's just like, if we spread the love, if you will, if we just flatten things out a little bit, I think it's fair to take care of these things that we need taken care of. And you could make this argument for a number of causes, but I think racial disparity, especially as we've seen, we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder, and obviously that's not today, is it? No, it was Memorial Day, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't think it's happened yet. Has it? Has it already been a year?
I think it was Memorial Day weekend or right around there. I think it was right before Memorial Day weekend. Hasn't occurred yet, David says.
25th.
Okay, less than a week away.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting to that point, and like, how much value can you put on that? Because this was a case where it's just seen as unreasonable force, and obviously police brutality is a whole different topic, but It's just one of many ways that our society targets minorities, people of color. And yeah, let's just stop doing that, huh?
Yeah.
Is that so hard? Is
Nice,
that worth
yeah.
is that worth $4.7 trillion? Maybe.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for listening to my TED Talk. Is there anything out of there that you want to discuss further? I feel like I breezed through the tipping stuff pretty quick.
I mean, no, I feel like we've touched up a lot on like a lot of the problems that we have with the general distribution of wealth in our country. I remember seeing an infographic that kind of like put into perspective, you know, the 1% and how much wealth they have in the country compared to like even like the middle class citizens. And it reminded me a lot of like, have you seen those videos where it's like, here's Earth and now here's Mars and now here's Jupiter, and you get to like you start to see how like just disproportionately large these celestial bodies are. And seeing that infographic in terms of like the 1% and money in our country reminded me a lot of that, where it just got to a point where like, where does it stop? Because it's such a drastic difference in size that it's almost incomprehensible.
Yeah.
So I think that's also another issue with like addressing that problem, is that it's such a large amount of money that it's almost difficult to comprehend as well, for like when you're just thinking about it casually. So I mean, whether or not within the next 50 years our country would be able to address something like that in a way that is permanent and also fair, I'm a bit pessimistic, but you never know.
Yeah, and I mean the whole argument for capitalism is that the distribution of wealth should be, you know, lopsided a little bit, because trickle down economics, right? Which we've seen time and time again, totally works. Sarcasm included.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I mean, there is something to capitalism in the way that it incents innovation and progression, especially when you look at like the healthcare space. But it's obviously flawed. Like, don't get me started on what my medical bills have been lately this year. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how broken all of that is.
I mean, my parents have been planning on visiting South Korea, and they keep putting off, you know, medical appointments or dental appointments, because even if they were to go to a different country on the other side of the globe to get a full physical done and all of the benefits that come with that, and also getting things checked up and stuff, easily much cheaper, or much more affordable, I should say, than it is to get it here. So they've just been putting it off and putting it off, and it's really sad to like, I've had plenty of friends and colleagues who say like, oh yeah, I have this back problem that I can't address unless I decide to go to Mexico or something like that to get it taken care of, because I can't afford it here. And then like even the stuff with like, you know, insulin, that's been a really big thing, especially recently, with how it's almost not survivable if you have diabetes and you need insulin. So like I think definitely have to strike a balance, or realize that we can maybe negotiate the mentality that capitalism will always breed innovation. But also, I think most financial systems in an idyllic setting, you know, is beneficial for most people, but we always get problems with like people misinterpreting things, or not misinterpreting things, but like, you know, finding ways to manipulate the system for their own benefit. And I don't think that's something that's necessarily limited to capitalism or, you know, socialism. You're always going to have issues where you have to have balances and checks to make sure that things don't go completely haywire and ruin the economy of the country.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if there was a perfect economic system out there, everyone would be using it, but there's no clear leader. Every country has its own ideology about what they think is best, and they have their own evidence support that reasoning.
Yeah, so that's why I get a little bit pessimistic about how effectively and how quickly the US in particular would be able to address those kinds of issues, because there are a lot of foundational problems that need to be addressed as well. But it's all interconnected, right? You know, so all of these social issues and these economic issues are pretty closely tied, arguably. And so, yeah, there's a lot to be done, but I mean, I don't even know. I'm not someone who can say exactly like what sort of plan of action we can even begin to take, because that's not my field of specialty. But as a layman peering in from the inside, I guess, as a citizen, you know, that's kind of just my perception. But
I guess the way it seems to me is just like taxing the right thing. So taxing the wealthy. Like, the whole argument is like, if you tax a wealthy person, then they're not going to want to pursue that wealth as much. But yeah, they are. Like, are you kidding me? Like, how competitive people are to be 10% better by some metric than someone else? Like, yeah, they are. So like, you can up your tax on corporations, on the wealthiest Americans, and people are still going to want to be the richest person in the country. Make no mistake. And I think by using those taxes to fund programs that advance our nation's social equity, what we do for the environment, and I don't know, a million other things, creating jobs for people who would not have jobs otherwise, and merging those priorities as well. That's a big thing with the American Jobs Plan that Joe Biden proposed, the big one. It's merging two priorities of the environment and creating jobs. The whole platform has been, hey, we're creating jobs, but a lot of those jobs are creating green energy, renewables. And so like, it also has that side benefit. But we also know that you can't really sell much of the American public on renewable energy. So it's being sold as a jobs plan, hence the name. But I just think you have to provide the right incentives for people. And to tie things full circle, I don't think tips are the right incentives for people. I think fair wages and health benefits. And yeah, that was another thing with like DoorDash and stuff, is they don't get health benefits or anything. So if they get injured, especially like, even if it's on the job, a lot of times there's costs that are not covered.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, anyway, thanks for listening. if you want to support something that makes the
fun.
world a better place, might I suggest the National Asian and Pacific American Women's Forum. You can do charity and chat there for Emily. We've got details below in the podcast episode or YouTube video, wherever you're watching this. What is that, episode 7 or 6 or 7 that we talk about why we support that cause. But yeah, we do have an email address. 6. We do have an email address, talkytaffy@gmail.com. You can send us any questions, comments, or concerns there. Love to hear from you. We will be taking a break from our next episode. So June 2nd, Emily's going to be off and earning that sweet, sweet dough. I'll probably be recovering from a second surgery. So we're going to take off the 2nd. Hopefully we're back on the 16th. It'll all just depend. But Emily, do you want to tell us what we're going to be talking next time we convene?
So next time we're going to be talking about memory error. It's been something that's been very much on my mind lately as I've been not only like memorizing music and stuff like that, but just how fickle our memory is and how manipulatable, how easily manipulated our memories can be.
Okay.
And so that's something that's really interested me ever since I was in high school. And so yeah, we're going to be talking about all the different kinds of memory error, sort of the implications of memory error in different situations, like for instance, eyewitness testimony, or even like psychology when you're going through trauma, or going through therapy and you're discussing your own like personal memories and how those can change over time, and how those can be manipulated as well. So
cool.
Stay tuned. It'll be a fun one.
Like a month or a month and a half from now, who knows?
Yeah, we'll keep you updated.
Yeah, we'll figure out. If you want the latest updates, Discord's probably the best place to be for that. We've got a link in the description, and Emily's going to drop it in chat now too if you're not already there. Yes. That's probably the best place to keep an eye on it. We do have a Twitter. I don't think we're very good about updating it, but I don't know. I might make an effort to update y'all on what we're doing over the next month or so. But yeah, anyway, if you're watching this or listening to this on YouTube or a podcast app, we do air this show live on twitch.tv/talkytaffy. So come watch us there. Links down in the description as well. So anyway, love y'all. We'll see you when we see you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for watching.